Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on the internet. Alright, today's video comes from our awesome patrons over at Patreon, and this week they voted on this video, which sounds like a great idea, and it is Top 11 Misconception of World War II, Eurocentric Edition. And this is by Military History Visualize, a great channel. So, I think this is great. So it's a Eurocentric point of view with misconceptions, I guess, that come from the Eurocentric edition. So again, you're looking at, okay, so things we assume about the war, think we know about the war, but specifically from the slant of being Eurocentric. So I'm wondering if there's things more about like maybe the Pacific theater, specifically the non-United States part of it. So things like China and Japan's war, or maybe what was going on in India or something like that. So those are just some of my ideas, and I think this is great. Anytime you can address misconceptions from your own culture, then I think that's big, and that's really important. So we're going to check this out here in just a second. All right, if you would like to vote in polls to get a video featured each week, you can join our Patreon. Starts at $1 a month if you'd like to support our channel, and it will get you access to a poll at the very lowest level. Higher tiers can get you access to other goodies and other types of stuff. Also, the original video link is down below. Make sure that you check that out. Military History Visualize is a great one. If you're into military history, they're a must subscribe. So definitely do that. And if you're into gaming, by the way, and you're into military games and stuff like that, you might want to check out my gaming channel, Mr. Terry Gaming over here on YouTube, and then Mr. Terry History over on Twitch. And I'll see you over there. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
There are quite many misconceptions about the Second World War floating around out there. Well, time to sink some of those. Don't worry, this will be big. So let's start off with Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is a word commonly used when it comes to the Second World War.
Right.
Especially the early German victories in Poland and France. Because the later campaign achieved in 6 weeks what the Imperial German army couldn't do in 4 years in the previous World War.
True.
Yet there was no Blitzkrieg strategy. To quote the author of the Blitzkrieg legend, the 1940 campaign in the West may be considered the Blitzkrieg par excellence. In reality, however, it was not planned as such. Hitler was counting instead on a years-long struggle as in the First World War. The so-called Blitzkrieg concept, Blitzkrieg-Denken, developed only after the campaign in the West. It was not the cause but the consequence of the victory. Which brings us to the next point.
Oh, I'm trying to follow what he's trying to say here. So, I mean, no one goes into... People don't really go into wars thinking that it's going to be long. I mean, usually people will avoid those types of things. And of course, World War I was like that. I mean, they thought it was going to be done by Christmas, you know, and it was starting in August, September, and that sort of thing. So the whole Blitzkrieg idea, I mean, if they're just talking about Blitzkrieg from its strategic point of view, so Blitzkrieg kind of goes in 3 waves, right? If you know about this, it starts with the bombing campaigns, which of course, you know, aerial war has completely changed since World War I. World War II, that's one of the, maybe the biggest technology that's improved from World War I is the air war. So you do that, do the bombing, bomb your targets, etc. And then you put your heavy mechanized warfare after that. So tanks, right? Tanks came a long way from World War I to World War II. So they go through on the ground and do more of the work there. And then the last stage is kind of your foot soldiers. And unlike, you know, in World War I, when the foot soldiers come in a lot of these places, a lot of the heavy work has been done for them because the bombing and all those sorts of things and the tank warfare has already cleared a lot of that out. So trying to understand a little bit more about what's the misconception that they're saying that it came after the idea of Blitzkrieg.
The mechanization of the German army. A lot of people assume that it was a mechanized army well equipped with tanks, assault guns and half-tracks. Well, nope. The problem is most documentaries always run footage in the background, but that footage is usually propaganda footage, in which of course the Germans showed off their best troops, quite understandably. But let's look at some data. Namely the composition of the German army in June 1941, just prior to the invasion of the Soviet Union. Now the number of divisions was as follows: 21 panzer divisions, 13 motorized infantry divisions, 3 motorized brigades, and 95 infantry divisions suited for all operations.
That still seems
and
huge
another
to me.
62 infantry divisions in various lower states of combat effectiveness. Note that mountain cavalry and various other divisions are not included in this setup. Of course, maybe this isn't convincing enough, so let's look at the number of vehicles
Yeah,
for
because it's
Operation
not.
Barbarossa. The German army assembled 600,000 motor vehicles and 625,000 horses. Thus they attacked the Soviet Union with more horses than trucks in summer 1941. Now I know what you're thinking. With so much horses, the Cherries were either heavily undermotorized or a bunch of bronies.
I will say, bronies. I will say that's way more horses than I ever thought. I thought horses were virtually done for the most part, at least in like any kind of the fighting aspect.
Well, your call. Now after the Battle of France and before Operation Barbarossa, there were few things in between. So let's look at the Battle of Britain. Some people still claim it was a close call. Well, by 16th September, the day of the last great attack, Germans
Not
believed
really.
they
I
had
mean,
driven fighter command down to 177 effective fighters. The true number was 300% higher. 216 Spitfires and 356 Hurricanes. These assumptions shaped the Luftwaffe's turn from attacking the airfields and command, control, communications and intelligence infrastructure to London. An error but less significant than is often claimed. Those early attacks inflicted little damage. Had the Germans continued them, they still would have lost, just less quickly or badly.
Okay, so I guess the misconception always, I guess the misconception is that the Germans had more planes, right? But like the Blitz on Britain was enormous. It destroyed like much of London, the Blitz on London. It was very, very deadly. That makes it even more impressive in a way. If you're saying that they were completely outnumbered, which it looks like they are here, the Germans did a ton of damage. Now, was it close? I don't know. The way you would have to say it's close is if it had enough success that it allowed for the land invasion of Britain, which that never happened, right? They had to, Blitzkrieg, like I was kind of saying, if you want to look at it from that perspective, you've got to win the air war before you get the ground war, and they never did that. So they were never able to put down those troops and, get tanks across the English Channel and that kind of thing. But it was incredibly devastating.
Now related to the Battle of Britain is of course Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of England. Some people think it could have been done in 1940 if the Battle of Britain would have been a success.
Right.
Well, let's look at some data. The invasion in Normandy, D-Day.
Well, it's not necessarily that it could have been successful. That's possible, but it could have been attempted.
US and Commonwealth forces several years to prepare. These forces included two of the leading naval powers of that time, which had experience with amphibious landings, and had gained a naval and air superiority close to supremacy in the Normandy region.
You have to.
Even if the Germans could have gained air superiority, they wouldn't have been able to achieve naval superiority. In summer 1940, the German Navy had 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers operational. In contrast, the British home fleet had 5 capital ships, 1 aircraft carrier, 11 cruisers and 8 destroyers. There were also another 7 capital ships, 2 carriers, 7 cruisers and 30 destroyers in the Mediterranean fleet. In short, Germany lacked ships, properly tested amphibious craft, experience in amphibious landings and logistical operations to support such a landing. Considering that the British and US, which had plenty of experience in all those areas, went into numerous troubles during D-Day, it is very unlikely that Sea Lion would have any chance of success unless the Royal Navy would just disappear. Next up, a bit on the political side.
True. Like Blitzkrieg doesn't even really, if you're looking at that, it doesn't even involve the Navy really. It's very much a land thing. And that's, of course, what the Germans were very good at this time was, fighting on land. Yeah. It could have been attempted, I guess. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if anybody still thought that would, happen, like it could work. Because, you had to win out with the naval power. And you definitely believe maybe by then, too, the United States would also have been more involved.
The notion that the USA was neutral in regards to the war in Europe. Well, I will just
that's a
refer to the law
misconception.
here and then quote Franklin Delano Roosevelt and let you decide. In March 1941, Roosevelt announced an act to promote the defense of the United States. You probably didn't hear that one before, because it's commonly referred as the Land-Lease Act. This act allowed to support with equipment of any country whose defense the president deems vital to the defense of the United States.
The Lend-Lease Act totally took out any idea of neutrality for the United States. The United States were never neutral in the fact that they were always, even from the beginning, being more supportive of the Allied side. They're more supportive of the British, especially the British. That was never in question, and the Germans knew that too. That's why when you look at if you look at the German declaration of war in the United States or something like that, they would talk about they said like Adolf Hitler said in his speech and everything that the United States sit there and proclaim neutrality while at the same time they're out here defending the British and supplying them. And then, it started out with the idea the United States would only sell to nations at war if they bought basically in cash up front and they came and got materials. And then, of course, like the British run out of money and the ability to do so. Then you get the Lend-Lease Act, which basically said, the United States will support their allies regardless of their ability to pay or to extract those resources. So there was not a lot of neutrality. I mean, it depends on what you say is neutral. You have to actually be physically fighting for it to not be neutrality. I think if you're on the other side of that, you're going to say, well, no.
After various incidents between US warships and German U-boats, Roosevelt in September 1941 stated the following. That means very simply, very clearly, that our patrolling vessels and planes will protect all merchant ships, not only American ships, but ships of any flag engaged in commerce in our defensive waters. Note that the defensive waters were not just the US coastline.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say.
In July 1941, US Marines replaced British occupation forces on Iceland.
Yeah.
Now politicians...
That's what I was going to say, that, these defensive waters. The defensive waters include the North Atlantic and all the way up by, Britain and Ireland itself. Well, not really.
Usually produce a lot of hot air, so did the German jet fighters, the Messerschmitt 262. Yet many proclaim it was too late. Well, it wasn't too late, and nobody delayed it, by the way. Jet engines were completely new technology. Even regular piston engine aircraft had a development cycle of 2 to 3 years during World War II. Furthermore, those engines needed materials that were heat resistant. Germany didn't have those in sufficient numbers. Thus, they had to develop special alloys that were rather limited in quality. By any means, the Messerschmitt 262 was actually introduced far too early. There were only 10 experimental units of those. 3 crashed, 3 had an old tail wheel. Of the 3,000 required flight hours necessary for proper testing, only 10% were flown. The production series planes have elevator and aileron jitter. For a more detailed view, you might want to check out my video on this topic, which also deals with the Messerschmitt 262 combat
I don't know enough about this.
Now, since we're up in the air, let's move on to strategic bombing, which some people claim was just ineffective and useless.
Strategic bombing was
First, in World War II, strategic bombing was to enlarge...
Wait, people say that? That strategic bombing was useless? I mean, it's goal number 1 when you're fighting in this era. Strategic bombing cripples the enemy before you get to do that before you can do anything else.
Degree is still in its infancy and barely understood. This is similar to the development of artillery combat in World War I, which went from complete ineptness to developing principles that are used up to this day.
Oh yeah.
Second, thus once crucial understanding was gained and applied properly, the results were quite effective, in terms of reducing the combat effectiveness of Germany considerably. To give you a glimpse on both the ineffectiveness and effectiveness of strategic bombing, let's take a look at the following remark of the German military historian Horst Bock. One of the most decisive Allied successes in the bombing campaigns, the crippling of German fuel supply, was achieved with only about 0.6% of the bombs dropped on Europe and about 1.3% of the bombs dropped on Germany. Yet to achieve this decisive goal in the last months of the war, it required years of experience and preparations, even in other areas of warfare.
So it's not that it was useless. It was what you're saying. We should I guess say is that it was extremely difficult to be successful. I mean, they said 0.6 of bombs dropped on Europe. Wait, what? Okay, hold on. Okay, so 0.6 of the bombs dropped on Europe went to the German fuel supply. Yeah, but there's a lot of reasons why you drop bombs. It's not always about resources, bombing, infrastructure.
So before we are moving down to the muddy areas, let's stay up a bit in the sky and look at the claim that German aces were better, because they had so many more aerial victories than their Allied counterparts. Well, if one thinks a little bit about
Red Baron's
it
dead.
becomes rather obvious why the German aces had so many air kills. This was explained by one of the leading German aces, Günter Rahl himself. Here's the Blitz version of it. First off, German aces usually flew until they died, whereas Allied aces often returned home after a certain number of sorties. Second, to shoot something down you need an enemy. Well, Germany and Japan had a lot of shortages, except when it came to enemies. There were plenty of those around. Meanwhile, Allied fighter pilots often just saw thousands
So,
of
okay, I'm going to let it follow the train of thought. So, it seems like they're effective just because there were so many enemies to shoot rather than the other way around because the Allies were able to out-resource them. I don't really, and maybe you guys could comment here in the comments. Is this thing, the German aces were so much better, is that a conception you have? I don't really have that. I have that they were good fighters all over. I don't really know about it being like skewed towards the Germans necessarily. At least not not in World War II. You're about World War One again, like the Red Baron or something like that, but not here in World War II.
bombers, and when an Axis plane showed up, they were usually heavily outnumbered. Third, since German pilots were better equipped and trained in the early war, the few German pilots that survived until the mid or late war were way more experienced than the average Allied pilots, and thus still could rack up kills. In short, under the same circumstances, Allies aces would have achieved a similar number than the German aces and vice versa. And this doesn't diminish the achievement of any Axis nor Allied pilots out there. Let's move to the elephant in the room, Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Many claim it could
Okay,
have
wait.
been
What's the okay? Hold on. I was gonna guess, but yeah. What's the misconception? Barbarossa failed due to it being delayed.
success if it was not for the delay. Well,
'Cause of final
no,
winner?
nope, niet, nein. Barbarossa failed due to many different factors, but
Yeah.
probably the underlying assumption that the Red Army and Soviet Union would collapse after a few weeks or months of fighting was the main cause of them all. Although the gains in territory, captured equipment and men were huge, they were not decisive and the German army suffered substantial losses to achieve them. It is important to note that looking at the mere numbers of German losses can be quite misleading. Barbarossa was started with roughly 3 million men, but those were not all frontline troops. A large amount of them were construction troops and other non-combat units. Yet the large amount of the losses of 1941 were crack combat troops, many of which had fought in Poland, France, Norway, Greece and other places. Hence, the losses sustained affected the combat effectiveness far more than the simple loss figure might suggest. If you don't trust me, here's the data from the German High Command itself on the combat readiness of its troops in June 1941, before the attack on the Soviet Union, and here for March 1942. On the left side, there are the divisions, suited for all operations, and on the far right, the divisions suited for limited defensive operations. As you can see, in summer 1941, the first number was 136, whereas in March 1942, it was 8. In short, the German army was stopped by the Red Army, not the Russian winter. Now, since that
It
was
can always be bold. So I don't know. Was this a misconception you guys said too? Usually, when it comes down to Operation Barbarossa, a lot of people say that. I guess the winter had an impact, but a question would be that, like a misconception would be that it was impossible, like regardless, like it was impossible. And I don't know about that, but it probably was not possible. Anyways, I mean, the Soviet military was plenty strong and had plenty of will to fight and that sort of thing. And the fact that the Germans didn't have the resources to keep up something like that. You know what I mean? So I've always been on the end that, yeah, I mean, the winter does play a role, but it just maybe what it does is speed up the loss for the Germans.
pretty cold. Let's warm up with a bit hot air again. So back to politics, namely the Axis, because, well, it is a common misconception that it was actually some kind of alliance, whereas it was mostly a balloon of hot air and best a dysfunctional family with severe communication issues. Or to put it a bit more nicely, there were no concrete agreements about global war aims or even functioning mechanisms of coordinating the war effort against the Grand Alliance. Which brings us to the final point, military intelligence.
What?
While some people claim that military intelligence is an oxymoron, others state that military intelligence won the Second World War. Well, a leading military intelligence historian...
Yeah, I can agree with this. People will say this. People, generally, the public thinks, yeah, intelligence is everything, right? When there are so many things below that are more important. World War II to me was a war of resources. It was a war of oil and food. It motivated reasons for war, for going to war in the first place. When you look at things like ideas of like Lebensraum, like living space, more food and place that the Germans can go into in Eastern Europe, but then also maybe then also motivating factors of the war, like Operation Barbarossa, and the fact that the Germans needed to get more access to oil that was over in the east. So I can agree that this would definitely be a misconception, that it came down to just military intelligence, the smarter, better army won, when that's a pretty lazy assessment.
Published the following in his intelligence article in the Cambridge History of the Second World War from 2015. Intelligence did little to cause Axis defeat, but much to shape how the Allies achieved victory.
Yeah.
In other words, when you don't...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was total Allied misconception. It was brilliant. They had D-Day, and it was like this massive stroke of genius and all these other things that they had done, when it's like there are so many other factors.
You can't beat them all, even if you know when and where it will show up. Well, I think we are done here. Notice that almost all these points are more elaborately expressed in various of my videos. As always, all written sources are in the description, as are the links to Facebook and Twitter. If you like this video and want to know more, you might want to take a look at this playlist, which includes all videos that cover the discussed points of this video. Or if you're low on time, just check out the major blunders during Operation Barbarossa. Anyway, thank you for watching, and see you next time.
Let's look real quick at their other videos. So you guys should check these out for sure. Did Hitler delay Me-262? Comparison German infantry, motorized and panzer divisions. Road to Stalingrad. U.S.-German Atlantic strategy. German Panzer Grenadier. Motorized division. Operation Barbarossa. Errors and blunders. That would be a good one. I'm very interested in Barbarossa. Barbarossa, would an earlier date make a difference? That's a good one to go after one of those misconceptions they just talked about. And then a couple on the Battle of Britain. That's awesome. I'm not... For somebody that's into history as much as I am, and as many people are, I do not consider myself a military historian. Not to this level of very specific things. I'm not that. I think I know enough to get by and stuff like that, but for I think as much as history as I cover, I'm not a military history buff in all of those things. I know enough and I can have conversation about most all these things, but there's a lot of people that know way more than about me, and I see it in my own community and stuff like that. But I like learning about it, you know what I mean? So I like to have a little more varied. So if you want to get into a lot more military history, this looks like a channel that you're definitely going to want to get into. Anyways, let's talk about the video. All right, we're back. So, like I was saying, there's a lot of military history I know out there that you guys want to talk about. And I could see, on my Discord server, which you all should definitely join. We got over 8,000 people over there. Military history is often the key, or not key thing, but it's the most talked about thing, especially in this World War II stuff. So there's a lot of the stuff that you want to talk about, misconceptions and all that. Come on over to our community, and I know we could learn a lot from each other. But so... from my perspective as a teacher, of course, we don't go into this much detail in a lot of this stuff. You know what I mean? Numbers of panzers going into, Russia and stuff like that. It's not what we are able to cover. That's military history. That's the next level. That's, and in university, college, stuff like that. So there's a lot to learn for me, I know, in there, because I've taken, military history classes in college and stuff, but I haven't pursued learning more about that more. So this kind of stuff is definitely helpful for me. And sticking this kind of stuff into my lessons, there's always a handful of students that really like to learn about that stuff. And I try to give little chunks of that throughout there. So that's pretty good. So one thing I was going to say, though, as a teacher, that's really important for this idea is I always want to try to address misconceptions. I think it's one of the most important things a teacher can do is what does society outside of education teach about wars? Because you get a lot of that. You just hear it in just everyday speak. And a lot of it, of course, is wrong, because that's when you get the cultural ethnocentrism, view that kind of comes through without the academia to back it up. And I think that's really important for me. So these kind of videos are important for me to be able to do, especially if it's on major things, that come out of that. So there are a few in there. I think we can go through, like the Barbarossa stuff and the military strategy kind of things, superiority there, winning the war. Those are definitely things you got to do, because as always, history is more complex than some of these just on the surface explanations. And that's how history often is. I mean, people want an easy, simple explanation with the fewest amount of variables, right? And of course, that's not how history works. It's always more detailed. There's a lot of more nuances with that. And it's important for us to, I think, to keep looking at those kind of things and look at all the different perspectives that are out there and get out of any kind of ethnocentrism and ethnocentric view of history. Anyway, thank you so much, especially to our patrons that chose this video. Thanks for hanging out here. And let me know what you think. I'd love to know, or are these misconceptions, do you think, these misconceptions that they brought up, do you think these are ones that have been portrayed a lot? Are these misconceptions you've had or you've seen? Let us know and we can talk about those down below. All right, again, if you would like to get involved in Patreon and vote in videos, you can go down below. Also, some fun history merch. The shirt I'm going here, our Mario Kart World War II shirt, is still for sale over at our Teespring store. It's a lot of fun. That link is also down below. Original video link is down below too, and links to some other fun stuff. All right, thanks again for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.